My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 29 years old. 3 months after my grandmother died, my dad took her ring off my finger at Easter dinner. Not asked for it. Not reached for my hand gently. He grabbed my wrist across the dining table, twisted the little gold band loose, and pulled it over my knuckle while everyone watched. For a second, nobody breathed. The ham was sitting in the middle of the table. My aunt had just poured sweet tea into plastic cups. My mother had one hand frozen on the serving spoon, her mouth tight like she had known this was coming, but hoped I would make it easy. Grandma's chair was still there. Empty. At the end of the table, where she always used to sit. Dad held the ring up like it was evidence. "This belongs in the family," he said. I stared at him because I thought grief had already hollowed me out as much as it could. I was wrong. My younger sister, Lauren, sat beside him with her eyes locked on the ring. She looked hurt, but not surprised. That was the first thing that made my stomach turn. She wasn't shocked that he had taken it from me. She looked like someone waiting for a promise to be kept. Mom leaned toward me and whispered, "Emily, don't make this uncomfortable." That was when Dad dropped the ring into Lauren's palm. Lauren slid it onto her finger. It was loose on her. Grandma's hands had been small like mine. Then Lauren smiled. "Thanks, Dad." I looked at the ring on her hand. Then I looked at Grandma's empty chair. And something inside me went completely still. I didn't scream. I didn't lunge across the table. I didn't beg my sister to give it back. I picked up my phone. My dad's jaw tightened. "Who are you calling?" I tapped the number I had saved 2 weeks before. When the voice on the other end answered, I said exactly who I was, and then I said, "I'm at Easter dinner. My father just removed my grandmother's ring from my hand and gave it to my sister." The table went silent in a way I had never heard before. Then the person on the phone asked me one question. And when I repeated that question out loud, my dad's face drained. If you've ever been treated like the problem for finally protecting yourself, stay with me. Drop your city and local time below because I always like seeing where these stories reach. Subscribe if stories about quiet people finally being heard speak to you. Tap like if you already believe silence is not weakness, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story when it drops. Around here, the truth has a way of arriving exactly on time. Now let me take you back. I was always the easy daughter. That was the word my parents used when they wanted it to sound like praise. Easy, mature, understanding, responsible. What it really meant was that I was expected to bend before anyone else had to. Lauren cried louder, so Lauren got comfort. Lauren felt left out, so Lauren got included. Lauren made mistakes, so everyone talked about how sensitive she was. I handled things quietly, so everyone assumed I didn't need handling. By 29, I had built a life that looked stable from the outside. I had my own apartment, a job as a hospice intake coordinator, and a habit of answering family calls even when I already knew they were about errands, appointments, or smoothing over someone else's feelings. My parents liked that about me until it inconvenienced them. Grandma never treated me that way. Her name was Margaret, but I never called her that. She was Grandma in the deepest sense of the word. Warm kitchen lights, toasted bread, peppermint tea, a hand on my shoulder when the room got too loud. When I was little, she noticed things nobody else did. She noticed when I got quiet after Lauren got praised for the same thing I had done the week before. She noticed when Mom told me to be patient while asking me to swallow something unfair. She noticed when Dad called me dramatic only after I finally said I was hurt. Grandma never made a big speech about it. She just made room for me. Her kitchen table became the place where I could breathe. It was small, scratched near one corner, always covered with mail, coupons, and one of those ceramic sugar bowls shaped like a strawberry. She would sit across from me, twisting the thin gold ring on her finger whenever she was thinking. The ring wasn't flashy. It had a tiny oval stone, pale blue in the center, worn soft around the edges from decades of dishes and gardening and holding hands. To anyone else, it probably looked like an old piece of jewelry. To me, it looked like her. After Grandpa died, she never took it off except to knead dough. She used to place it on the windowsill above the sink, and as a child, I would watch the sunlight catch it while she hummed under her breath. The first time she let me try it on, I was 16 and crying over something my father said at dinner. She slipped it onto my finger and told me some things were only small until they were the only thing keeping you steady. That was Grandma, gentle but never vague. When her health started declining, the family shifted around her in ways that made me uneasy. At first, it was subtle. Lauren began asking about old photographs and keepsakes she had never cared about before. Dad started opening cabinets when he thought no one was watching. Mom kept telling me not to make Grandma's last months harder than they had to be. One afternoon, I walked into Grandma's hallway and saw Lauren standing by the bedroom dresser, holding one of Grandma's jewelry boxes. She smiled too quickly when she saw me. "I was just looking," she said. But her eyes dropped to Grandma's hand. To the ring. And for the first time, grief came with dread, because I knew my family. I knew what they called fairness. And I knew, even before I could admit it, that they were already deciding what Grandma's love should be allowed to mean. I didn't say anything to Lauren that day. I just looked at the jewelry box in her hands, then at Grandma's fingers, where the ring still sat like it had always belonged there. Grandma noticed too. She didn't scold Lauren. She didn't make it a scene. She only said, "Put that back where you found it." Lauren laughed like it was nothing, but her cheeks went pink. After that, I started noticing everything. Grandma's decline wasn't sudden. It came in small surrenders. First, she stopped driving at night. Then she stopped driving altogether. Then her handwriting got shaky enough that she asked me to fill out forms while she sat beside me with her reading glasses low on her nose, correcting me if I missed a line. I took her to appointments on my lunch breaks when I could. I brought soup in containers labeled with dates. I sorted her medications into a plastic organizer every Sunday evening. I made phone calls to insurance people because Grandma hated automated menus and would hang up the moment a machine asked her to press 1. None of it felt heroic. It was just what needed doing. Some nights after work, I would find her sitting at that kitchen table with the television too loud in the next room and a blanket around her shoulders. She'd pretend she had only just sat down, even when the tea in front of her had gone cold. I would warm it up. She would act annoyed. Then she would drink it anyway. That was how we loved each other, quietly, practically, without witnesses. Lauren visited too, but differently. She came on Sundays if Aunt Carol was there. She brought flowers when people could see them. She posted a picture of Grandma's hand in hers with a caption about cherishing every moment, then left before the dishes were done. I tried not to judge her for that. I really did. Everyone handles illness differently. That was what I told myself. Some people get scared. Some people avoid hospitals. Some people don't know how to sit in a room where someone they love is slowly disappearing. But then Lauren started asking questions that didn't sound scared. Did Grandma ever say who gets the blue china? Is that cedar chest actually old? Did Grandpa give her that ring, or was it from her mother? She would ask casually, like she was making conversation, but she always listened too carefully for the answer. Dad started using the word fair around the same time. At first, it sounded harmless. He would stand in Grandma's living room with his hands on his hips and say things like, "We just need to make sure everything is fair when the time comes." The time. That was what he called it. Not Grandma dying, not losing his mother, just the time. Once, when I was packing up a stack of old pharmacy papers, he glanced at Grandma's bedroom and said, "No one person should walk away with all the sentimental stuff." I looked up because I knew what he meant, even if he hadn't said my name. Mom was softer about it, which somehow made it worse. She pulled me aside in the laundry room one evening while Grandma was napping and told me Lauren had always felt left out of my relationship with Grandma. "She's hurting too, Emily," Mom said. "You have to remember that." I remember staring at the dryer door, watching our reflections bend in the metal. I wanted to ask, why Lauren's hurt always needed something from me. But I didn't. I folded towels instead. A week before Grandma went into hospice care, she asked me to stay after everyone else left. The house was quiet in that heavy way a house gets when too many people have been pretending not to worry. Grandma was in her robe, sitting at the kitchen table. Her hands looked thinner than they used to. The ring slipped a little when she moved. She took it off and placed it in front of me. I knew what it was before she said anything, and still my throat closed. "I want you to have this," she said. I shook my head right away. "Grandma, no." "Yes," she said, calm as ever. "Not because it's worth anything. It isn't, not really. I want you to have it because you know what it means." I couldn't touch it at first. She pushed it closer with one finger. Then she said, "Some people hear love and think ownership. You don't." That broke me more than any dramatic speech could have. I cried quietly, embarrassed by how young I felt. Grandma let me. Then she told me to put it on. It fit. Of course it did. Before I left that night, she said something else. "I've written down what needs writing down." I looked at her. She didn't explain much. She just gave me that look she had when she had already thought 3 steps ahead and didn't want anyone arguing with her. "People get forgetful when they want something," she said. After she died, the house changed immediately. Not physically at first. Her sweater still hung over the chair. Her grocery list was still clipped to the refrigerator. The strawberry sugar bowl was still on the table. But people moved through the rooms differently. Dad took over like grief had made him the manager of everything. He had boxes brought in. He labeled drawers. He told relatives he would handle the personal items. When I asked if we should wait until everyone had talked, he said, "Let's not make this complicated." Things went missing in small ways. A photo frame from the hallway, a stack of old recipe cards, the little glass bird Grandma kept by the sink, nothing valuable enough to accuse anyone over, just enough to make the house feel like it was being quietly emptied while Grandma's voice was no longer there to object. Lauren kept looking at my hand. Finally, one afternoon, she asked, "Did Grandma actually say you could keep that?" I turned the ring without meaning to. Dad was in the next room, close enough to hear. Mom suddenly got very interested in wiping an already clean counter. "She gave it to me," I said. Lauren's mouth tightened. "But legally." That word sat in the room, longer than it should have. 2 days later, I called the number Grandma had left in a folder marked household papers. It belonged to her attorney. I expected a receptionist, maybe a vague answer, maybe nothing at all. Instead, after I gave my name, the woman on the phone paused and said there were documents regarding specific personal items. She said it gently, like she knew that sentence would matter later. I stood in my apartment with Grandma's ring on my finger and felt grief shift into something sharper. Because my family was still talking about fairness. But Grandma, apparently, had been talking about proof. The next day, I called the attorney back from my car during lunch. Her name was Denise Walker, and she sounded exactly like the kind of person Grandma would trust. Calm, direct, not cold, just careful. She asked me to confirm my address, my birthday, and a few details about Grandma's estate. Then she said Grandma had signed a personal property memorandum 6 months before she died. I knew enough from work to understand what that meant. Not everything in a family has to be a courtroom battle. Sometimes a person leaves written instructions for the items that matter personally, the things that carry memory more than money. Denise read only the relevant part to me first. Grandma had named me for the ring. Not the girls, not whoever wants it, not the family. Me. Emily Ann Carter. I remember sitting in the parking lot behind the hospice office with one hand on the steering wheel and the other curled around the phone. My thumb kept touching the ring like I needed to make sure it was still there. Denise said Grandma had also named me as the person she wanted involved in distributing several sentimental items. Nothing huge. Photo albums, her recipe box, Grandpa's watch. The blue china Lauren had suddenly become curious about. She was concerned there might be pressure after she passed, Denise said. That was the sentence that stayed with me. Not because it surprised me. Because it didn't. It should have felt good to be believed. Part of me did feel that. A small, exhausted part of me finally unclenched because Grandma had seen the same pattern I had spent years explaining away. But underneath, that was something heavier. Grandma had known. She had known her own son might not honor what she wanted. She had known my parents might ask me to surrender something just to keep Lauren comfortable. She had known I would be told to be reasonable, patient, easy. And instead of making a speech, she had made a record. Denise told me she would mail me a copy and email a scanned version if I wanted it. I said yes to both. Then, before we hung up, she added, "If anyone pressures you about the ring, call me. Don't try to sort it out alone." I almost laughed because sorting things out alone was basically my family role. But I saved her number. After that, the pressure got less subtle. Dad called me 2 nights later and asked if I had thought about what he said regarding family property. I told him Grandma gave me the ring. He said, "That may be how you see it." That sentence made my skin go cold. It was such a small thing, but it told me he wasn't confused. He was choosing language that made Grandma's decision sound like an opinion. Then he said Easter was coming up, and he didn't want tension at the table. I said I didn't either. He waited, like that was supposed to make me offer the ring. When I didn't, his voice tightened. "You know, your sister is grieving too." There it was again. Lauren called the next morning. She didn't yell. She sounded wounded, which was worse because it made me feel like the cruel one for having something Grandma gave me. She said she wasn't trying to take anything from me. She just didn't understand why Grandma would leave me something so visible. She said everyone knew I was Grandma's favorite, and maybe I didn't realize how that felt. I listened from my kitchen, watching the email from Denise sit unopened on my laptop. For a moment, the old guilt reached for me. Then I opened the attachment. There was Grandma's signature at the bottom. Shaky but hers. The guilt didn't disappear. It just had to stand beside the truth. Mom called the day before Easter. She said she hoped I was still coming. Then she lowered her voice and said, "Please don't bring paperwork into a family holiday." I hadn't told her about the email. So either Dad had guessed, or someone already knew more than they were admitting. "I'm just coming to dinner," I said. Mom sighed. "Then maybe don't wear it just for one day. Why invite hurt feelings?" I looked down at the ring. For one day. That was always how it started in our family. One day, one dinner, one small sacrifice, one more chance to prove I cared by giving something up. But Grandma had not given me the ring so I could hide it. So on Easter, I wore it. Not to provoke anyone, not to make a point. I wore it because it was mine, and because the woman who gave it to me had been specific when everyone else wanted things blurry. When I walked into my parents' house, the smell of ham and brown sugar hit me first. Coats were piled on the entry bench. My cousins, kids were running through the hallway. Everyone was doing that loud holiday cheer people use when grief is sitting right under the surface. Then I saw Grandma's chair. Still at the end of the table. No one had moved it. No one had set a plate there either. It was just empty, pushed in neatly, like the family wanted credit for remembering her without having to feel her absence too much. Dad was laughing with Uncle Rob near the kitchen doorway. Mom was carrying rolls to the table. Lauren stood by the sideboard in a pale yellow dress, holding a glass of wine she had barely touched. Her eyes went straight to my hand. Then to Dad. Dad saw it too. For a while, he performed normal. He asked about work. He told Uncle Rob the ham needed 10 more minutes. He clapped a hand on my shoulder like nothing was wrong. But every few minutes, his eyes dropped to the ring. And when Mom told everyone to sit, I realized my place card had been set beside Grandma's empty chair. Across from Lauren. 2 seats down from Dad. That was when I felt it. Not fear exactly. Preparation. I slid into the chair, folded my hands in my lap, and felt the ring press lightly against my skin. Dad sat down, looked at my hand one more time, and stopped smiling. And I knew they had planned something. Dad cleared his throat like he was about to make a toast. For 1 second, I hoped I was wrong. Then he looked straight at my hand. "Emily," he said, loud enough for the table to hear, "I think we need to settle this before it becomes a bigger issue." The conversations around us thinned out. I felt Grandma's chair beside me more than I saw it. Dad kept his voice calm, which somehow made it worse. "That ring was your grandmother. It belongs to the family. Lauren has been very hurt by how this has been handled." Lauren looked down, but not before I saw the relief on her face. Mom touched my arm under the table. "Honey, just don't make a scene." I remember thinking that was the scene, not my reaction, not my voice. The scene was my father turning Grandma's last gift into a family vote. I said, "Grandma gave it to me." Dad's face hardened. "You don't get to decide that by yourself." Then he reached across the space between us and took my wrist. It happened so fast that no one stopped him. His fingers closed around my hand, and he twisted the ring gently at first, then harder when it caught on my knuckle. I froze. Not because I agreed. Because public humiliation has a way of making your body go quiet before your mind catches up. The ring slid free. Dad held it for half a second, then placed it in Lauren's palm. "There," he said, "now we can all move on." Lauren slipped it onto her finger. It was loose. She smiled anyway. "Thanks, Dad." The table went completely still. Uncle Rob stared at my father like he didn't recognize him. Aunt Carol's fork rested halfway over her plate. Mom looked at her napkin. I looked at Grandma's empty chair. Then I picked up my phone. Dad's eyes narrowed. "Who are you calling?" I tapped Denise Walker's number. When she answered, my voice sounded strange to me, too calm. "This is Emily Carter. I'm at Easter dinner. My father just removed my grandmother's ring from my hand and gave it to my sister." Denise went quiet for a beat. Then she asked, "Is the ring currently in your sister's possession?" I repeated it exactly. "Is the ring currently in Lauren's possession?" That was when my dad's face drained. Lauren's smile disappeared. Denise asked if I was on speaker. I said no. She said to put her on speaker if I felt safe doing that. So I did. Her voice filled the dining room, steady and professional. She confirmed that Grandma's personal property memorandum specifically named me as the recipient of the ring. She confirmed the ring had been given to me before Grandma died. She confirmed Dad did not have authority to redistribute it. Then she said, very calmly, that withholding it after notice could complicate the estate process. No threats, no drama, just fact. That was all it took. Because my father could argue with me, he could call me emotional, he could say I misunderstood, he could tell the table I was making things difficult. But he could not make Grandma's signature disappear. Lauren pulled the ring off slowly. For a moment, I thought she might set it on the table instead of handing it to me. Then Uncle Rob said, "Give it back." She did. My hand was shaking when I put it on again. Dad tried to recover. He said this had been a misunderstanding. He said everyone was grieving. He said he was only trying to be fair. But the words sounded different now. Mom never said she was sorry. She just sat very still, and for the first time, her silence did not protect her. It showed everyone exactly where she had been standing. Dinner did not explode. That almost made it more painful. People just stopped pretending. Aunt Carol got up and started clearing plates no one had finished. Uncle Rob asked Dad, very quietly, what else had been handled from Grandma's house. Lauren went upstairs. Mom followed her. My cousins took their kids outside. I left before dessert. A few relatives texted me that night. Not dramatic messages, just enough to tell me they had seen it, enough to tell me I had not imagined the wrongness of it. In the weeks after, Dad's siblings started asking questions about the photo albums, the recipe box, Grandpa's watch. My parents still spoke to me, but differently, more carefully. Lauren stopped posting about Grandma. I stopped going to family holidays for a while. Not forever, maybe, but long enough to understand that peace built on my silence was never really peace. A month later, I went back to Grandma's house to help finish sorting the kitchen. I made tea in her old mug and sat at her small table. Her empty chair was across from me. On the table was the folded copy of her letter, the one Denise had mailed with the memorandum. Beside it was an old Easter photo of Grandma holding my hand when I was little. The ring was back on my finger. I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad, relieved, clear. Grandma was gone, but for the first time since she died, the chair across from me didn't feel empty in the same way. It felt like witness. And I finally understood what she had tried to leave me. Not jewelry. Proof that being quiet never meant I had no power. Proof that love without respect was not something I had to keep earning.